It's really about simple economics. And in fact, a number of these buildings actually are single-loaded, facing the water, which tells you what the value of a land view would be in that context. So the second paradigm was really development around an internal amenity, and that's views of Gulf. You have it's the alternative to views of the water. It was a way to amenitize property outside of the water, and to give. And there was a demand for Gulf, but really it's really something that came out of the Radburn tradition, where you have houses facing a greenway, this walkway here. So the Gulf was a way to kind of create an economic generator of that same type. So that again was a modern planning technique, a way to kind of solve this problem of cars and pedestrians. Obviously the cars are killing people, so we need to get them separated away, get them separated. So that's what the Radburn tradition was about. And then the third one was really about it was just buying land, period. And this is an American ethic. It was developed to deliver life within the home, a very internal idea. So it's really about taking the American homestead, which is something that very much part of the American dream, and then putting that with the kind of sexy American broadacre city model that many people were interested in, and that's really where the Florida lot was developed. And this is about being able to motor to your house and have a very large, have a robust environment within the house and a very large house. So really here we are. We have the three markets: the land, the views of land, the views of the Gulf. The golf courses and views of water. So Seaside offered an alternative, and that is urbanism. But it was not just any urbanism. It wasn't just city urbanism. It was urbanism with amenities. So it delivered views, and it delivered amenities in the kind of Nolan tradition about trying to bring things outside, off of the water, and bring value deeper into the site. So it was a very extroverted model, and I'll talk about that in a moment. It was also and obviously it was an urban model, but it incorporated kind of a high quality of design to it. This was, by bringing kind of whimsy into the architecture, it helped give that sense of something special. It was kind of like, the tablet had been, tried many times. Apple finally figured it out. It's very user-friendly. It was the design of the iPad. It was the right time. It was an intersection of a number of things that made the iPad very successful. So in many ways, Seaside was the iPad of its day. So here's Seaside at its very beginnings. The St. Joe's property, which we'll talk about in a minute, is right here. And if St. Joe's were to develop first, they would probably have developed the towers that we described, and then Seaside would be a little hamlet at the foot of the mountains. And then of course that beach slide that I mentioned earlier was actually Seaside's beach. So they had the same amenity, and they understood that views of the value. There is value in views of that beach. So here's a view looking across the beach side. So you can see a number of these houses all have porches, and then in between the houses they actually have views that across easements. So you actually bring the views deeper into the site. And then the idea of views actually goes deeper into the plan too, and I'll show you this in a minute. But there are actually some houses are entitled to develop towers, so you can actually get views from a single-family house, but at a very small size, so you don't cast shadows on your neighbors and so forth. 30A is a public road that goes right through the middle of Seaside. If I were to critique Seaside, I would say that not the road itself is a weakness, but the way that the architecture engages it. Obviously we've talked about the Seaside as one of these early projects, and it was a learning and a laboratory, but it does not have the definition of a town, of entering a town like you would in some other approaches to southern towns. So, but nevertheless, the 30A is the lifeblood of Seaside, and then it brings the energy into the town. Seaside has a town center. Much like American downtowns, it's yet to be finished and yet to be fully realized. And a number of these buildings that are there on the square are temporary. And that would be considered an amenity. The other thing is there's boulevards and natural landscape elements that run through the town. And inside, Ruskin Square, it has a very humane scale, which this was something that was very new, and very lush park spaces. And here another image of Ruskin Square. And occasionally there are times when the architecture of the group, of the compositions, are not necessarily highly worked out, but nevertheless they make the space that would be considered an active amenity, a very social amenity. So the amenities are one of those issues. When you look at the plan of Seaside, if you look at just the amenities, this is a very luxurious plan. This is not just any grid of urbanism in the 88 acres of Seaside, but you can see there's a number of these park spaces that bring the value and bring opportunities deeper into the plan. So if you look at lots around these amenities, this is a considerable amount of lots. So you have all these lots obviously on the beach, around the park spaces, the boulevard, There's athletic fields back here, park spaces here. So you have a number of these houses that actually face what you would consider amenities, which is very luxurious. That was one of the components of Seaside. And you were probably going to say, Eric, what about all these white areas here? But when you look at those lots, these have links to the waterfront. So when you buy on one of these streets, you may remember this diagram from a moment ago, you have houses that face each other, but there's this little portal which tells you that the beach is just beyond. That portal that's an urban idea. That's a Camilo Cite planning technique about telling you what's beyond, because you can't see the water from the street. So it was a very clever trick by Robert and by the DPZ team. Here's an example of one of those beach walkovers. So you know the water is right just beyond it. This is sometimes a misused technique in new urbanism on flat sites when you have amenities. Sometimes we've noticed people actually blocking that view. But this is a trick about getting people moving on to the next item. And then, of course, they're all different. So that gives you a kind of sense of orientation as you go through the town. And some are more successful than others, and some are less. But sometimes with somebody mentioned to me, you can't truly love cities unless there are things that you're not necessarily fond of. That it doesn't always work for you. So that kind of creates that inherent tension, which is what some of the textures of Seaside that are very rich. Obviously, many people have talked about the career walks that run through Seaside. This was something that obviously everybody knows about them, but this is something I was really interested in. So when I actually mapped the career walks of Seaside, of the lots that are actually connected to a career walk, there's only one that I could find, and this may be wrong, but I could only find one that does not actually have a career walk, and I want to take exception because these lots right here were not planned by Robert and Daryl and the DPZ team. It was part of a separate planning effort. So there's only one lot that doesn't have a career. So just the fact that there's that amenity that runs through the town, that's very rich. So Seaside has made urbanism very sexy and a place that people in darn right charming. So when you look at the context, you can see that the context was really about internal development. Seaside had some very external components of adding value to properties amongst them, and with the idea that all boats rise in a rising tide. When you look at the context that has water views, Seaside offered water views, but also it had added public access to the water as well. Seaside, the context, they had golf courses, and that's obviously a limited market. Not everybody loves golf, so instead they offered a variety of amenities, parks and schools and the town center. That was kind of the foil. And then of course you have the context having developing large lots. Seaside offered instead public space. So when you look at this plan for Seaside, here it is down here, it actually plugged very well in a sea grove, and it actually suggested connections that are actually there in place, ready to become vehicular into watercolor next door. Watercolor would have been developed substantially differently if Seaside was not there first. And they took some of these same techniques, although maybe not as successfully, but trying to bring the value of the internal waterway system deeper into the plan. You can feel when you're here, you can feel the sense that you're nearby it. That technique of grabbing the value, just like water, and bringing it as deep and leveraging your best assets is something that was one of the Seaside gifts to surrounding development. You can see the same thing in Celebration when you're trying to create a place in the middle of nowhere, about trying to create that sense of an internal address. And also the idea of handing over that urban tradition of creating park spaces, smaller products. Seaside was somewhat the petri dish for Celebration, which Celebration was about taking developer product or builder product and putting them on park spaces, but offering open space as an alternative to internal space. So I'm getting the 1 minute flash here. Mizner Park, which is in Boca Raton, which George will talk about, was another internal address, and it was a very successful mixed-use project. But one of the things that we did, and here's a picture of George here, looking very handsome. But he's facilitating a public process where we were asked to come down and master plan for Boca Raton to try to help make downtown Boca Raton one place. So we took that same idea of leveraging the best asset for Boca Raton, which is Mizner Park, and connecting it through the blocks into other successful areas to try to create one place and one downtown. So again, that same technique that Seaside used about trying to take your amenities and stretching them as far as you can as a redevelopment technique is something that was a huge help for Boca Raton. This is looking down south of Mizner Park, down into adjacent development. So, and my last slide here is beyond looking there about what Seaside's gift was creating value, identifying a new market need, which was urbanism, but at the same time reestablishing the urban tradition in Florida and offering an alternative model for development. But in particular, I would say what its most successful component is, and we see it here in West Palm Beach, is offering tools for redevelopment, of connecting your best assets into other development. So, thank you.
Thank you, Eric. Just a couple of minutes over. Awesome. Next up, Robert Davis.
Well, Jeff asked me to talk a bit about lessons learned and what we might have done differently if we could turn back the clock. I think time is very interesting. You can't really turn back the clock, but you can take advantage of it. And that may be the most important lesson we learned. I had learned a lesson at considerable expense when I was a small-scale developer in South Florida about leverage. I had borrowed the usual 80–85% of the total development cost to build 10 townhouses in Coconut Grove, following a very successful 9-townhouse project that I had done over 2 or 3 years prior to that. And I hit a market downturn, and I was hanging in there by my fingernails, hardly able to breathe, wondering if I would make it through this interesting process. And fortunately, the scale was so small that I survived, if barely, paid off my loans, licked my wounds, and went on sabbatical to try to figure out what I was going to do next, which included traveling around the Southeast, looking at seaside towns, and around the Mediterranean, looking at Mediterranean versions of towns along the coast. And one of the things that I figured, aside from seeing some very interesting models for development, was that I would have to move slowly, because I knew I was going to inherit this 80 acres of land instead of stock in the family department store, a great gift from my perspective, because I had no desire to be in retailing. My wife took up that mantle with great success, about which I'll speak in a little while. But I did know that I had this land but no money, and we managed to sell one Gulfront lot in Seaside to give us enough money to live on for a couple of years and to begin doing the planning. We couldn't afford to pay Andreas and Liz, so we paid them in the form of a lot. And that was also true of the night crew, their protégés, young students who jointly got a lot for all of the work they did over the course of over a year. At night, the tables in DPZ's office would be cleared off of the work that paid the bills and kept the lights on, and the Seaside work would come out, and a great deal of Cuban coffee would be drunk, and they would do this work. So they actually paid off all their student loans by waiting a long time before they cashed in their lot, because they couldn't figure out what to do with it. Anyway, so we had no money, and we had a lot of time, because I was still pretty young, and a lot of land. And as a result of that, we decided we were going to do one half of one street and build 2 houses and see if anybody would buy anything. And after the better part of a year, I finally gave up on being able to sell something, hired a salesman, and he closed 6 lots in about a month. I had been very persuasive, but I hadn't managed to get anybody to write a check. And that was basically the pattern we set. We would build, we would cut a street in, we would sell lots, we put picket fences up when we sold the lot and hung a little sign up that said the Smiths from Birmingham or the Joneses from Atlanta now own this lot, and here are their names and their children's names, and it made it look like something was happening. And in a few years, the Smiths and the Joneses actually built houses, and so it looked like a great success, even though it was only one 300, 400-foot street, and we only had 6 houses. It looked great. One of the great mistakes that a lot of second-generation new urbanist developers made was listening to their civil engineers who said, look how much money you'll save if you put in 3 miles of streets. And that's true on a per linear foot basis, but it made these projects look like great failures, even though after 2 or 3 years they had sold at least as many parcels as Seaside had. We also used the idea of time, of slow urbanism, of incremental urbanism as a way of selling things. We would use price increases to slow down sales if they looked as if they were going to exceed the rather limited capacity that we had to oversee the construction and make sure it was done well according to our code. We would also use the announcement of price increases to spur sales when they slowed down, as they did when the Texas-Louisiana oil boom turned into a bust. We allowed Jackie and Donna, our salespeople, who have been there continuously for the past 30 years, to announce a price increase and give people the opportunity over the next 90 days to buy under the old prices. Then we would have to suck air for quite a while and wait until the market caught up to us. On the question of what I would do differently, I would really think a lot harder about governance. Doris Goldstein, who has helped me think about this a lot over the past few years, unfortunately wasn't available to Seaside when we first started and thought about, we actually took boilerplate condo documents, not even HOA documents, from my last project in Florida, had the then county attorney change the names, and that was the total amount of thought we put into governance. I've subsequently read the Federalist Papers, and I would urge all of you who are considering being developers of long-term projects to read this, because it's a wonderful set of essays about human nature and about our tendency to seek power, to be factional, to hate each other, to create conflicts when they don't even need to exist, and to try to maximize power for ourselves and at the expense of our neighbors. I think if you don't think about human nature when you're writing a set of governance documents, not only will you not get anything as brilliant as the American Constitution, you will probably have a real mess on your hands as you reach the point where you're ready to kick back and retire and enjoy your life and enjoy all the accolades you will get from doing such wonderful work in town building, but at least a small number of your neighbors who are truly nuts will have gotten themselves elected to office, because you almost have to be nuts to want to be involved in homeowner politics the way they are structured now. Homeowner politics are an outgrowth of a movement right after World War II, when racially and ethnically designed deed restrictions that would prevent people like me, who were Jewish, from living in certain neighborhoods or prevent African Americans from living in those neighborhoods. They were abolished by the Supreme Court, and so we came up with this notion of privatopia, which could do much of the same thing. Might not have the racial quotas in them, but it would at least keep places exclusive and private. And I think we've been using the wrong tools, the tools of privatopia. Another book I would urge you to read, which gives you the history of the whole notion of private governance, which has come to dominate the way we do developments now. So I would urge you to think about some other methods of owning and controlling the streets and squares and public realm or civic realm of your town, and think very hard about what responsibilities homeowners associations will have, if there are homeowners associations, if you feel you have to have them, and how to prevent the kind of factionalism that tends to result. I think that if you had a well-managed homeowners association, it could actually be fun, and you could spend most of your time after a 45-minute review of the town manager's performance, drinking coffee or drinking beer at the local cafe and enjoying life at the beach or at whatever amenity your settlement offers. One of the other lessons that I've learned is the importance of keeping the ownership and management of retail in a form that allows for coherent management. I would not sell any of the retail in downtown Seaside or in Seaside Central Square. Instead, we're just going to experiment. Over the next few years, when the real estate market comes back, I would sell the opportunity to build a stilt house, and we would keep the air rights from the ground up to 20 feet or so and build the retail and perhaps office within that, that space. I would also, I think, continue the pattern that we did in Ruskin Place and throughout Seaside of selling one lot at a time and forcing people through the pain and suffering of building row housing on small lots, because the scale of the place is very important, and I think that the scale of Ruskin Place is quite wonderful, and some of the buildings in downtown Seaside I think are too big. But beyond that, economically, when you build big buildings and one of them doesn't succeed, as happened recently in Seaside during the downturn, you really have an eyesore on your hands when it stays empty for a while. I've urged mayors to do this, think about the same thing of downscaling the zoning so that you get smaller increments of risk, no one of which is going to make your city look like a failure during the next inevitable downturn. So that's, I'm being given the 3-minute warning, and I think I will wrap up. Do you want me to talk about the retail at this point, or? Okay. Well, the questions were, what's it like to manage a bunch of mom and pop retail? We've not gone after national credit tenants. We couldn't in the early years. We might be able to now, but one of the things that's happened recently is that term has been turned upside down, because many of the national credit tenants went bankrupt during the recent unpleasantness, and shopping malls found themselves with empty stores and very little flexibility in fixing them up. We actually had a bank that had been leased by one of the third-party retail owners go through a merger. They paid the rent, but they shut down the branch bank in Seaside, so it was dark for 1.5 years. And this can be a real mess in a small downtown. Our retailers are undercapitalized. They require a lot of hand-holding, but over time, they actually produce higher sales and higher rents. We charge, on average, 10% for almost everybody, except for things like the bookstore or the grocery store. And that has turned out to be a remarkably good strategy for us. We have done exceedingly well during the downturn. We actually have increased our sales every year in the low double digits since 2005, when our economy collapsed, through 2011, and it looks like 2012, knock on wood, without a hurricane, will be an even better banner year. 60% of our rents are coming from tenants who have been in Seaside for 20 years or more. That's extraordinary. That's just amazing. So these people actually have staying power once they get over the initial hurdle of transforming themselves from surfers to restaurateurs, in one case, or a child psychologist to a retailer of furniture and clothing. That's my wife's story. And it's very important, I think, to have this kind of variety, heterogeneity, and personality that these kinds of retailers give a place. And it helps in keeping the fun and funk, as would the continuation of smaller scale buildings that are appropriate to the kind of downtown we've tried to build. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. Excellent. Let me get this going again. Excellent. Thank you, Robert. That was wonderful. I think of the planting of a smaller tree. I think of the analogy of planting a smaller tree to let it heal better and grow taller. Right. in the retail discussion. Next up, we have Jorge Camejo from Boca Raton.
Thank you. Thank you, Jeff, and good afternoon. Can everybody hear me in the back okay? Hopefully. Good. I wanted to give you a little bit of background about Mizner Park, but first I want to actually say thank you to the City of Boca Raton for giving me access to information that I don't generally have access to any longer, and for also giving me the freedom of actually being able to use terminology such as urbanism, which in Boca Raton you're really not allowed to use it in public hearings. So that being said, let me give you a little background about Mizner Park and then offer some critique. But before I begin, I'd also like to recognize an individual in the audience here who is actually our county commissioner from South County, and that's Stephen Abrams and his wife, who have been very involved in Boca Raton. Stephen was actually a member of our Planning and Zoning Board, served as mayor of Boca Raton, and has been a dedicated soldier to the Boca Raton cause for many years. So thank you, Stephen. Let's see. Boca Raton in the 80s. This is a map of the city of Boca Raton. The downtown is generally here at Palmetto Park Road. This is US 1. One of the things that makes Boca Raton, or made Boca Raton unique back then, is the fact that the I-95 corridor was not connected until the late 70s. And so coinciding with the connection of I-95 between West Palm Beach and Fort Lauderdale is when the sort of outflow of commercial activity was getting ready to happen toward the I-95 corridor, because for many years it sat basically dormant. And so that was one of the reasons why the city and the Chamber of Commerce recognized that with the outflow of commerce there would be a need to do something in this original commercial zoned area of the city. This is the Boca Mall. The Boca Mall was in place until 1989 when it was demolished to build Mizner Park, but back then it was basically the largest consolidated ownership in the downtown. This is US 1 here. This is 2nd Street, and Palmetto Park Road would be right about here if the slide were to continue. Of course, we have the Atlantic Ocean and the Intercoastal to the right. Much of the downtown looked like this. It wasn't terribly exciting, terribly unattractive. This is the intersection of US 1 and Palmetto Park Road. This is Dixie Highway looking to the north from Palmetto Park Road. This is our downtown drainage system that wasn't much of a drainage system. Fortunately, because of the soil type that we have in downtown, certainly at that time, the water would collect like that, but it would percolate fairly quickly because it was basically sitting on beach sand. Again, Palmetto Park Road, this is looking to the east, and here's another shot of the Boca Mall. Coinciding again with the connection of I-95 down from West Palm Beach to Fort Lauderdale, Town Center Mall, or basically the Farber Group announced their plans to build Town Center Mall right at the intersection of Glades Road and I-95. So we were actually able to capture the moment that the dark cloud moved over the downtown in this slide. And so we had a lot more questions, obviously, than answers. And so at that point, the city basically decided that something had to be done, and they identified the area that was to be the 344-acre downtown. And of course, we see here, this is again the Boca Raton Mall property. This is Palmetto Park Road. Here's US 1. The Atlantic Ocean would be to your right, and this is the Boca Raton Resort and Club. And so the idea basically was to have a series of parking garages that would facilitate additional investment, because everybody knows the only reason people come to a downtown is so they can have a place to park. A flawed strategy from the beginning, because there really was no reason to come downtown, and that was the basic problem. It really wasn't a lack of parking, it was a lack of desire to be there. And so the first time that we actually see some idea that might actually, bring about some significant change was in this plan, and this is the 1986 Beautification Plan. And at the north end, you see here, this is the first introduction of something that would eventually evolve into Mizner Park. This was a plan developed by Bill Cox, an architect out of Coral Gables, and Jim Mosley, an urban planner. And their plan basically was to identify the consolidation of ownership that had taken place over the years, and introduce in this graphic what could happen if we actually developed a master plan for the downtown. And again, their idea for Mizner Park was to be the art park, and we thought that art park sounded too much like aardvark, and so that eventually became Mizner Park. This is the original plan submitted by Tom Crocker, and I have to say that so much of this credit for Mizner Park really belongs to Tom Crocker, because Tom Crocker was the developer that was willing to break from the standard recipe, and this is the standard recipe that any developer would have basically submitted for the initial concept of a development along US 1. Here again, this is US 1. Palmetto Park Road would be here to the right of the slide, and the Atlantic Ocean would be up on the top. The basic layout was, the big surface lot. One of the, I think, flawed aspects of this particular design was that this was actually one large building, and so the retail arcade would have actually taken place on the second level. This was a large parking garage here, a large garage here, the hotel structure, another garage hidden behind office and retail on the second floor level, and the same thing here. These are essentially the same cultural and public amenities that were identified today that really remain constant, and then you have other cultural and nonprofit locations here at the southeast quadrant, and then two large office buildings shown here. And so, again, this is the plan that Tom Crocker first submitted, and then we changed the plan. And changing the plan is something that we'll get into at the end of the discussion. Changing the plan really, speaking of controversy and whatnot, Robert, this project was just so fraught with controversy because of the fact that we dared break from the standard recipe for a strip center off US 1. In fact, in the words of Charlie Seaman, he said, any idiot can build a strip center off US 1. Mizner Park needs to be a special place. And so from that, we basically converted the plan to what you see today. This is the master plan of Mizner Park. Again, the north end is essentially the same. We broke up the large building that would have been in this area. We broke it up and broke the garages, again, in fours. The second floor retail arcade now happens on the ground plane, and we broke up the surface parking lot into basically just surface parking along what we call today Plaza Real. And so that's the plan as it moved forward. Of course, Mizner Park opened in December of 1990. That's an important date because of other events that I'll get to later. Immensely popular, obviously. Coinciding with the construction of Phase 1 is this headline. This was in the Boca Raton News. The Boca Raton News at that time was going to what was known back then as the USA Today format. So everything had to be in these great 30-second headline kind of stuff. And as you can see here, they basically took the original concept by Tom Crocker, and they display it as if it's a series of buildings basically sitting on a green lawn. Looking at that diagram, it looks like, gee, there was almost no development, no intensity whatsoever. If you look at their depiction of what we were actually doing, they completely misrepresented it by showing, of course, all the temporary parking lots, et cetera, that were part of Phase 1 but would ultimately be replaced by a public parking facility. But there was significantly greater footprint and greater impact to the site than what is depicted here. Needless to say, this was the sort of flag that led to a public referendum where the CRA, the appointed CRA board that actually, frankly had the courage to bring forward a project as significant as Mizner Park was at that time and as different as it was, that board, as a result of this, and the question here is essentially, should the duties, responsibilities, and liabilities of the Community Redevelopment Agency be turned over to the City Council of Boca Raton, and should the City Council become the Community Redevelopment Agency? And so essentially the question was, well, gee, should you have the right to elect your public officials that are making decisions about downtown, yes or no? And the overwhelming answer, of course, was yes. And so the appointed board that was, again, the body that really had the courage to bring forth such a cutting edge and controversial concept for downtown was summarily dismissed from office and bid farewell. Again, I think the idea, the downtown concept is basically how do you take the North Activity Center and link it to the South Activity Center via a pedestrian connection. And that's, if I have a criticism of Mizner Park today, it would be that, and we'll discuss it a little bit further in a minute. Interestingly enough, going through, we're actually moving our offices at City Hall, et cetera, and one of our graphics assistants dug up this plan. He came to me and he said, I found this plan. Is this something we want to keep? And looking at this is a plan developed by a gentleman named Milo Smith in 1968. And if you look at what this basically is, this is Palmetto Park Road. This is then the Boca Mall site, now Mizner Park. Mr. Smith, even in 1968, before the Boca Mall was even built, developed a plan of creating this fairly consistent pedestrian way that would split or basically present the Mizner Park plan much as we actually executed it subsequently without knowing that this plan even existed. So it really kind of confirmed to us that it made sense from the very beginning. Is it a seminal project? Absolutely. The issues that we faced in presenting a project that turned its back on US 1, and there's a number of reasons why we had to turn our back on US 1. Number one is that between US 1 and Dixie Highway there's very little space. So there's really not a strong likelihood that there would ever be a significant retail activity adjacent to Federal Highway on the west side. So Mizner Park, if it presented any kind of retail or any type of relationship to the street, would be fairly minimal in that area. And so the idea that we thought made sense was to reward people for coming to downtown as opposed to driving through it, and that's one of the fundamental principles behind establishing Plaza Real in its current form. The most successful aspect that's time-tested, I'd say, is just a good design, a good bone structure that sets up a really dynamic area. And I'm happy to report I actually spoke to another significant player in this equation in addition to the CRA board. I would credit Charlie Seaman, and I already mentioned Tom Crocker, but Charlie Seaman was definitely instrumental in bringing the concept together and helping us in bringing it forward. Charlie mentioned to me that we actually have Lord and Taylor coming in. The Yard House is under construction today, and there's another restaurant, some Jazz, I believe, Stephen. You might know more than me. But anyway, so the good news is that what was at one time a Jacobson's department store, which was heralded as the first department store east of 95 after the construction of Town Center Mall, unfortunately Jacobson's as an institution did not survive, but the store in downtown was quite successful, and so Lord & Taylor is coming into that store. 3 minutes. The 2008 recession, it certainly did impact Mizner Park. We have perhaps more vacancies than normal, but nothing earth-shattering. Mizner Park, I think, has a pretty strong and pretty deep strength and desirability in today's condition. And what would we have done differently? Essentially, the controversy was really related to the initiative for Mizner Park was accompanied with a beautification and infrastructure plan that totaled approximately $50 million. Of that 15.6 million was being funded by a special assessment. And so the fact that we were committing the CRA's tax increment toward this private development while at the same time implementing a special assessment that other downtown property owners would have to pay is what made it controversial. And so those individuals that objected to the special assessment are the ones that began to try to chip away at the credibility of the CRA and the credibility of the project. I suspect today they would all come and say, that was a good thing that you guys did, because we're all making millions of dollars out of the catalyst effect of this project, and they would probably thank us profusely. However, in the meantime, there was a lot of bloodshed and a lot of controversy. I think that is my last slide, so I will stop there. Thank you very much for your time. Appreciate it.
Thank you, George. Very good. Next up, David Pace.
Thanks. So Geoffrey and I did a little conspiring. It's not my first rodeo. I've been the last speaker on Friday night before, following other people. I am surprised by the brevity and what a good timekeeper you were. But I didn't prepare slides. Geoffrey knew that, so he prepared them for me. I'm a tax accountant turned developer, and in front of any room other than designers, I can make you think that I know all about design. But I couldn't possibly bluff you. So what I'm going to try to do with my time is save some time for our Q&A, Geoffrey. I'm going to not run the slides, if that's okay with you. You just trust me, it's beautiful. You all did the work, so it's beautiful. You've been there maybe. Maybe I can tell you a few things about the project that you might not have known. This was a project, I'm going to set the stage, that was the old Naval Training Center in Orlando. We won the right to develop it. The Pritzker family, who owns Hyatt, was on the winning team, won the right to develop it after a national RFP that the city of Orlando did. Is Dean here? I saw him. There's Dean. Been here since day one with the project, for the director of planning for the city of Orlando. We were high bidder. And immediately, the mayor who was responsible and all of the people who were high bidder were dragged under the bus for a couple of years with the paper that we stole it after being high bidder. It was the largest remediation project of its kind in the history of the United States. 4.5 million square feet of demolition, 200+ miles of underground utilities, all encased in asbestos. Built by the military. They were not obligated to put as-built in. So you can imagine over 1,100 acres of property, the chasing down of the utilities so we could build. It was quite a challenge from that standpoint. Thank you, Geoffrey. 4,200 residential units, 1.5 million square feet of commercial and civic property. And the project was absolutely done not to make history, but to make money. The Pritzker family, they're great philanthropists, but they do not give the Pritzker Prize to their own projects, and they don't want to give the Pritzker Prize to their own projects. All of their projects, they're very comfortable in the world of multifamily, doing A+, B, B- level of work in office and retail and other aspects of their real estate development. And so it was a real show-me exercise. Joe Barnes is here. They had been my biggest land buyer in Celebration, biggest single land buyer, and when there was an opportunity for me to go to work for them to lead this new project that they had gotten, we had to convince them that we weren't crazy like the Disney people. We weren't going to bring 20 people to every meeting and just beat everything to death because they wanted a return on this project. I'm telling you this for a reason. The context of this project was, when we started in Orlando, the average home price was $120,000, actually about $110,000. And that was in 2000. In the next couple of years, it went to 267, from 110 to 267. Our prices went from 350 to about 550. Okay, the crash hit. The price in Orlando today is about $110,000. Our price is held at $463. Our houses, we don't allow any signage in the property to sell. The only people that get mad about that are people trying to sell their homes. But we have so many multifamily products that if you allowed a for sale sign in front of everyone that was for sale for a while, there would literally have been hundreds, if not nearly 1,000 for sale. So we got through all this. We had our share of speculation because builders were, for a while, allowing people to build multiple homes. And we had people who owned as many as 6 or 7 homes, single-family homes, never expecting to take occupancy. We ended up with about 50 foreclosures. We've moved our way through those. The project has been a financial success by any measure, except for those individuals that bought at the top and sold at the bottom as individuals. From a project development standpoint, it was wildly successful. Anyone who's worked on it will tell you they've never been part of a project that met its ROI requirements better than this project did. Why? I believe it's all because of the tenets of New Urbanism. And it's not because of any genius. It was not because of luck on our part. We had to do some work for an investment bank that we were recapitalizing the project with. I bought the project from the Pritzker family in 2007. That was their exit strategy for governance, Robert, so they didn't have to deal with homeowners long term. Sell it to the president of your company, when there's still 10% of the project value left, which was a lot of money to me, but rounding dust for them. So I bought the assets and liabilities from them, and I took all that on myself, and I'm glad I did, and it's been successful for me. Sorry, I lost my train of thought when I started thinking about what I just owed the Pritzkers. So anyway, so the governance, the point that I was heading towards was the governance, and one of the most important things that we did, because this was a profit-making venture, we had to protect the investors. We had a classic capital stack with private equity and debt. We had to protect the investors. The governance, we really sweated over it. But you're not immune to the crazy people. They've moved in. We with Dean, we had all the flexible zoning. We were very smart in our marketing. We never promised anybody anything that wasn't actually built or under construction. So everything on our site plan was just gray, future development within the zoning confines of what we had approved by the city. We sold land in 2005 that this week, Dean, is still getting grief because the apartment developer on that property wants to build what they bought from us, and they got approved from the city, and now they want to build it, and we can't let those people live near us. And what they don't realize is there's already 2,800 of those people living in their neighborhood, playing in the park, shopping in the same very successful grocery stores, eating in the sushi restaurant next to them. They just happen to rent versus own. And we created a governance structure there that every resident was a resident. There were no owners, there were no renters. That's what we did. I think a lot of people self-selected out. A lot of people saw this and said, that's not for me. I'm not building my custom home next to apartments. But we didn't hear from them. We did not lose deals because of the tenets of New Urbanism. Why did it help us with our value creation, which I mentioned a minute ago? We went really fast, and if you're calculating return on investment, you have to go fast. You have to, there's a couple of levers in our business. One is price, one is velocity. Only stupid people say we need both. We had to have both. We had to have high prices and high velocity to pull off what we had pulled off. We only paid $7 million for this land, but we had $50 million of additional investment just to get to Greenfield before we could start. That was more money than the land was worth. And so we had to go upper scale, and we had to have high velocity. All right? So what New Urbanism did for us is we were very disciplined coming off the pattern books that we had done with UDA, another client, by the way, but we came off the pattern books with UDA, we came from Celebration, we used a lot of the same principles, and we were rigorous about it because all of my production builders, all of them wanted to break the rules, always break the rules, and I was able to convince Penny Pritzker walk away from that $10 million check, which is very difficult for developers to do, because what people drive by after 2 years of development is what's going to set the tone for what happens next. We were able to quadruple our lot prices, independent of the increase in the market. This was the analysis. I told you I lost the train of thought. It just came back on the track. We had to, when I bought it, I had to prove to an investment banker that the increase in net cash flow this project had generated wasn't just luck by the rising tide of the market. So we isolated about $60 million of the profit that had been made to luck. It was just the rising prices, and we took advantage of that. Twice that amount was made due to the ability to always sell the hottest product in the market. Only in recent years have any of us experienced everything being cold. Usually something's hot. Apartments are hot, condos fail. Single family is strong, apartments go weak. Boutique office is working, the bigger tilt-up, three-story stuff isn't working. Something is always hot. And with the principles that we put in place here, all common lot depths, we could change on a dime with finished infrastructure. And when one builder was lagging behind, I'm going to call them 55s. We didn't. They would have been village homes or manor homes. But if they were lagging behind, the builder next to them didn't even have to ask me. He could notify them of their closing date and take their lots away from them. And they did it. They took each other's lots left and right because they were running out of lots. So we never slowed down. In a market that averaged 50 to 75 units a year in good developments within a category, and we had 14 categories. We averaged about 20 to 25 per category. But with all of our categories, we were doing 500 homes a year at the top prices in Orlando, and we would take homes away from one builder, give them to another builder. We'd take a commercial product away from one developer and give it to another developer, and guess what? They were out of product, so they'd pay more. We were always raising our price, always raising our price. We couldn't have done that if the architecture of one building didn't fit next to another. And I love Andres and Liz's work, absolutely, but I just have to laugh. People don't know me. I don't speak here a lot, but there'd be all you guys out there with your orange wheels and just amazed at the willingness to violate the transect in this one area and how clever it is. There's nothing clever about it. This guy was running out of product, and he bought the lots next door. We changed 90s. We changed 50 90s to 145s. And you did it overnight. The product worked, but because the architecture was consistent, because the styles were consistent, it worked. All the surrounding areas, the predominant style that we competed with was beige. That was it. So we were the outstanding product in the region. And I will tell you that the new urbanism also, with all these different product types, allowed us to have one small overhead really selling about a dozen different real estate development projects at once. We had a commercial division, a multifamily division. We had all these different single-family divisions. All of that happens with just one overhead, relatively large overhead, but nothing like had we broken this project down into individual pieces. And you couldn't pull that off if it weren't for the consistency of the design and the ability to interchange projects throughout the development. In a conventional development, you've just got to pick. You've got to say that, okay, we're doing 55-footers and we're going to sell them to one of these three production builders, and if they stumble because Texas went down, they're going to stumble in your project as well. So I can go on, and I do go on about this, by the way, with people, and I think one of the legacies of having studied Seaside and been amazed by it, it was the inspiration for Celebration. Having lived through Celebration, where frankly, Joe, I think maybe making money was fourth on our list. It was there, but number 1 and 2 was don't screw up the brand. That was the most important thing, because we were a little sober, Joe and I, when Lion King came out to video, and they made 4 times in the weekend they came out to video. They made 4 times the net present value of Celebration with a 25-year project on that weekend. So it was a little sober, and frankly, everybody acknowledged we got way too much of Michael Eisner's time. He loved this place, but we shouldn't have gotten more than 10 minutes collectively of his time relative to the amount of money. It was profitable, and any real estate developer would have accepted the returns from that project, but it was nothing compared to what Disney can make with some of their other assets. So how am I doing? You gave me the 5-minute sign? Okay. So a couple of the big risks. One obvious one is environmental. If you get an opportunity to work on environmental projects and you are a developer or can influence them, our approach to that, this was a pretty ugly site with everything imaginable. We confessed it all. We disclosed everything. We talked about it openly. To this day, residents in there say hi to the guy with the ponytail and the sandals out in front of their house with the test tubes, testing the water plumes, making sure they're clean. They'll be there for 100 years. We made sure the residents knew that. They're going to be here for the rest of your lives, making sure that this place is safe. We didn't allow anybody. We had to go to wherever there was a major contamination from the Navy. We had to put groundwater restrictions. We just put groundwater restrictions over the whole thing because you don't need to dig wells when you're on city water. So nobody can dig into the ground and pull up water, not even to dewater for a footer. We put all these rules in place, and we told them why. We don't want you disturbing the contamination that's down beneath. And all of our production builders that were scared to death of this, when they got through with it, they agreed. When you look at what we had done combined with the pollution liability policies, it was the safest land they ever bought. Had the full guarantee, faith, and credit of the federal government backing it up. So I would not be afraid of the marketing risks of trying to put a project in some of these great urban infill locations, because not having to commute will overcome an awful lot of sales objections. Location was a challenge. If you've been there, you would know that immediately to our south is one of the roughest neighborhoods in all of Central Florida. It's all on sewer. There's bars on the windows. It's unincorporated Orange County. The city won't annex it in because they've paid no attention to it. No improvements have been made. The county won't make improvements because once they do, the city will take it. And these people, and you know, Dean, I don't know if I'm telling stories, but that's the reality of this poor neighborhood to our south. High crime rate. When I was interviewing for my job, I thought, well, I had to go drive the perimeter of the old Navy base before I go up to Chicago to talk to the Pritzkers. There was a guy at our step, the house next to us, giving haircuts in his driveway with a line, 50 cents on a piece of plywood, giving haircuts in the driveway. Those are the neighbors for Baldwin Park, where we average 4 times the Orlando average in terms of price point. So what happened with Winter Park to our north, which is the most exclusive, everybody equates it to Winter Park. They don't go down south and look what's south. We managed to kind of push the value towards this lower end neighborhood, but frankly they haven't really improved. It's so bad, their values really haven't changed. But they shop in our neighborhoods, they use the village center, and you know what, it's just fine. It actually works. And within the community, we have prices that range from $200 for a garage apartment up to $3 million. Again, the average being in the high 4s right now. Another thing that I think is something you might not hear because a lot of developers, public-private, couldn't say this, but marketing works. In an urban setting, which we were urban, we knew that we did not want to do what we had done at Celebration, which was, I would have to say, 99% targeted to the nuclear family. That was the target market. That's not who lives in downtown Orlando. That's not who lives in downtown anywhere. Some, yes, and frankly, they self-selected in. The nuclear family self-selected in Baldwin Park because of the location, the schools, the churches, the things that were around their old neighborhoods. They wanted a new old house. But we marketed to every demographic that you wouldn't typically think a developer would, and it absolutely worked. All kinds of alternative lifestyles, age, sexual orientation, you name it, we advertise to it. And if you're consistent and you do it for years and you put your message in what they read, they will move in. And we ended up having this tremendous velocity because we reached spheres of influence that most developers never reach, and they sell to each other. And it's just an amazing place. The community is richer for it. You have people that in there that are 19 years old, and people that think it's the greatest. We won one of the greatest places to retire awards in America. It's not a retirement community, but we have plenty of retirees. Marketing, biggest problems. You know, the biggest problem is something that if I'd been able to time forward and listen to Robert Davis, that you got to own your retail, we would have owned our retail. But as Penny said, I remember the meeting, we're pretty long on Florida right now. I don't think we need to spend another $40 million. Let's sell the village center, the 50 acres. We had 13 companies vying for it. Then September 11th happened, and our top 3 all were contemplating bankruptcy because their tenants were going under. Big ones in town. I mean, we were picking, and we were left with only one group that agreed to do it in a single phase. All the others just wanted to cherry pick the Publix and the groceries and the drugstore, the only credit tenants, and they wanted to leave all the mom and pops. So we'll do that in another phase later. We'll buy it later. No, they'd never buy it. We'd have ended up with 1/4 of a 4-block area built, and we said no, we're only going to sell it to a group that'll do the whole thing. This is another testament to the discipline of having town architects and having owners that will live up and walk away from money if they don't follow the architectural guidelines. So between CHK, Torti, Gallas, and LRK, we designed essentially the village center for this group of retail developers that just did a horrible job. It took them, we had design oversight. You know, I brought a little bit of Disney with me, and so we had really onerous documents with 5 years of oversight. We got to reject without cause their tenants that they selected. All the architectural approvals, everything was completely up to us for 5 years. It took them 5.5 years to get their CO. So, and they were all self-inflicted wounds. And they were suing tenants. They'd finish one half of one street with scaffolding up everywhere else and start suing the pet store owner if they didn't open their store right now. It's like, well, people can't get to me. Your lease doesn't say that people can get to you. I mean, it was a horror story. The village center of Baldwin Park is the worst amount of story. It was 2% of our land sale revenue, 2%, and easily 90% of our effort went into trying to manage the village center. Well, thank God they sold it, but they sold it at the peak to a company that went out and bought 40 projects just like it, overpaid for every one of them, and they ended up in trouble, and they're in trouble right now. So if you go Google the Baldwin Park Village Center and read about it, you'll only read negative stories. It's the 3rd highest grossing Publix in their entire system. All the major things that you would expect for neighborhood retail thrive, very successful. The restaurants that are professionally run have expanded. They're doing tremendous amounts of volume. The ones that, like, you know, Geoffrey and I say, we like food. Let's open a restaurant, you and me. Robert, the surfers, or I'm a fisherman. Maybe I'd have a chance if I had Robert helping me. But none of them have made it. We've had multiple turnovers. And if we could do one thing over again, one thing, we would have actually developed the village center because only 10% of the problems that they encountered were real. Most of them were self-inflicted wounds, doing just a couple of guys, kind of getting out over the tips of their skis, as the president just said. So design turnover to residents, trends. If anybody wants to ask me about trends, I'll do it in the Q&A.
Excellent. Thank you, David. Very good. Maybe we could have the panelists come back up, and this is the time we'd like to open it up for questions and answers and comments. This is a CNU, and these are seminal projects that first New Urbanist project, the first mall conversion, and the first naval training or the military-based transformation. So we'd like to get some input. Yes, we have a question already.
Sure. Is this on? Okay. So the Publix was, we started off saying that we wanted the Publix front door to be on our main street, on New Broad Street, and Publix sort of smiled and said it's not going to happen because we have to have a parking lot in front of our front door. And we said, well, we'll get somebody else, and they said fine. And so we blanked. And so what we said, well, I tell you what, how about if we line that street with, you've got a florist, you've got a sandwich shop, you've got a film, you've got a pharmacy. We'll make those kind of fake storefronts, and we'll still face the street. No, wouldn't do that either because that requires a cash register, 2 doors. They had a 45,000 square foot prototype they wanted to use, and so they told us here's how it's going to work. But what they did allow us to do was to hide their parking lot with buildings. So we were able to put live-work units, surround them so that as you wouldn't just see a parking lot when you went down an important street. But they were very smart, and they were testing something. They believed that buying groceries was not an impulse situation. You didn't drive by and think, oh, I need groceries. You went to the grocery store with a purpose, and in fact, you didn't just go with a purpose. You usually park in the same space, if not the same row. And I think most of us would say, yep, that's me. That's what I do. I know when I can get in. I know where I park. And so they made us have a 2-year moratorium on building those units in front of their store. We only gave them a pylon sign that's about the size of this thing right here. That's their entire signage plus what's on the building itself. But what's on the building would be hidden by our buildings once we built them. We gave them the 2 years. Everybody found them. And they have the only thing they regret is they didn't make us build a bigger parking lot, because as a resident there, and I'm sorry, but I drive because I drive to the grocery store even though it's only a quarter of a mile away, because walking home is horrible with all the stuff we have. My wife gets 3 gallons of milk every single time. I can't walk home with it, but you don't go. There's very few times when you can go and have a peaceful experience. They're doing a tremendous volume there, and as a result, they're a lot more interested in infill locations where they can get closer to their buyers. And what surprised even them is how many people have crossed over past their own stores to come to this store, where they've gotten much more volume than they expected to.
I would say also, the loading dock is also lined and hidden with another
Yeah, it's
building.
everything is hidden, but it's so easy. You can look and say, "Oh, I get what they did." It's like it's not genius. It's just, but it worked. When you leave the front door of the Publix, you're looking at your parking lot and you're looking at your car, or you're going to return your, thank you, Geoffrey, you're going to, is this my parking? Yep. So these are the liner buildings. This is the front, our Main Street is right here. New Broad Street is right here. We put liner shops here, okay, and those are front delivery. They're small mom and pops. There's no back alley behind us for service. The loading bay is right here, which is behind a row of apartments, skinny apartments right there, 3 stories tall, and the truck's back in here. These are live-work units, and these are flex apartments where the ground floor is convertible to retail. The upper 2 floors are apartments, and this is the Publix parking lot. So when you look out, you're looking at an alley that services the back of these live-work units, which have a real commercial component, a single-family home, and a garage apartment. So each one of those live-works has 3 components.
And not only do the people that use Publix use that parking lot, but other apartments and everybody else can use that parking lot.
It's shared parking. Everything is shared parking. Yeah, what we delayed 2 years was this frontage. We were not allowed to build anything in front of them until they got a 2-year head start and their customers found them. Yep.
Yes, sir.
The land use mix is 272 residential units, roughly 270 square feet of 70,000 square feet of office, and then no. Well, there's the other office building, 70 plus the 90 over the arcade. And I'm sorry.
160.
Yeah, 161,000 square feet of office. Yeah, it's about 200,000 square feet of office, and then the retail, together with the department store, is 90,000 in the main corridor, and then 80,000 for the what is now going to be Lord and Taylor. So roughly 100 and the cultural uses, which is the 40,000 square foot Boca Raton Museum of Art at the north end, the outdoor amphitheater. And at the south end, we had the Cartoon Museum, which is now the Center for the Art, or not Center for the Arts, I forget what we're calling it these days. I think it is Center for the Arts at Mizner Park, which is a multiplex and a black box theater on the second, not multiplex, but flex space and a black box theater on the second level. Parking spaces is roughly 2,500 parking spaces in total.
Yes, sir.
Interesting comments on commercial space built out in town centers. You had to go fast and you wanted someone that could do the whole. Robert maybe regrets not doing a little more incremental approach in some of the town center. Just want to hear some additional thoughts on the scale. And if you had to do it over again, if you were the developer, would you have developed the town center in a more incremental fashion? Or are you glad you had to pull the trigger and push that?
Is that to David?
That's to me.
Yeah.
So the question is, would we doing it over, would we do it in more of an incremental fashion? And I guess in the economy today, we'd probably have to, but it was a pretty bad economy after 9/11. Our deal, frankly, and I didn't think I could have underestimated it at the time, and now looking back, I couldn't possibly have. And I don't mean any disrespect to any other brand, but we had only one grocery store that was knocking down our door to come into the project. Let's just call it Discount Grocer, and it's branded in Florida as where people don't like to go shop. And you had Publix, and Publix had 3 sites in our area. And if we didn't pull the trigger because they needed to close one of them, we would have lost them. Publix was willing to buy that quarter. They were willing to buy it and say, we'll just build our own space. Don't worry about us. I think most developers would have taken it. If we believe, and we think we've looked at, Baldwin Park today has a value, a taxable value of about $2 billion. If we had put the other grocery store in there, it would be less than $1 billion. Because our average price would be in the ones. It would be $170,000. We would not have $450,000 houses without that. So no, I would not do it differently. I would have picked a different person. I would have subordinated all of my back end potential income to that with the Pritzker and said, let's just put it. Come on, it's just $40 more million. You've got it. Let's do it. But they were not convincible. This was at the time, even though the mayor was being ridden out of town over this deal. It was a very risky project. It didn't. There were 10,000 people had a chance to bid on this. Only 4 did. And we won it because we made a fundamental underwriting mistake about the cost of demolition. Everybody else, and by the way, I wasn't on the team yet. I was still at Celebration. Everybody else was like $10 million higher. Our guys hadn't opened a disc that talked about the extra asbestos they found. So, by the way, if you're dealing with large-scale demo contractors, and you wonder how after a month they've only mobilized with like 3 pickup trucks, and this is the biggest project in the history of the United States, it's because they're waiting to hand you the change order, and they think that maybe a month is a fair amount of time. They walked in and handed us on a $15 million contract. They handed us a $10 million change order before they started work. And every other developer who lost is like, oh yeah, we knew about that. So it's like. But anyway, at the end of the day, it all worked out because we were able to have good velocity and good prices. I have to say one thing because Joe Barnes is here. The best thing we did, he was our town architect celebrate. The best thing we did at Baldwin Park is LRK went at turnover when all the crazies come out and want to govern the community, especially if you have architectural sensitivity. They want to take over that. Well, we took a picture of the front, back, and side of every home and every building in Baldwin Park at turnover, and we looked to make sure we weren't making any gross mistakes. We grandfathered every mistake, everything had been happened with photo evidence. And this was 4 years ago we did this. I talked to our head of the HOA just last week because I was giving a tour to a senator and I wanted to get an update. She says, we use it every single day. Every single day we use that where people want to tell on their neighbor, I'm trying to do this, you won't let me do that. That was grandfathered, it was here. Just as a practical, tactical thing to do, take a photo history of everything before you turn over to the association, and it'll be a lifesaver to create far fewer. Because in Celebration, Joe, I think you were gone. We had when the ARB got turned over. The first thing they did, they weren't excited about the new construction. They were excited about writing everybody up. And I'm not kidding. And they went around the neighborhood with the pattern book, writing up violations, and they had 1,000 of them. And people who'd been using gas, for 7 years in the community were now told they had to get rid of their gas because it wasn't properly screened. Well, Joe Barnes said they could put it there. Joe's gone now. Because it was the only place. It had to be 10 feet from this house, 10 feet from the other. It's the only place that goes, it's fine, it'll be okay. We're reasonable people. We approved it. Had to rip it out. So Celebration went through that. Lesson learned. You all should learn this. Photo and then grandfather everything.
Great.
Sorry, I didn't mean to take
glad
that.
you told that.
But it was on my notes, and I meant to tell everyone.
Thank you.
So.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Robert, how long do you think it would take to build out the rest of Seaside commercial area?
How long will it take to build out the rest of Seaside?
The commercial.
Depends on the economy and available financing. It's pretty much built out, but not with climax buildings. That's one of the other lessons learned from our perspective about our pace of development, and that is the first buildings you build, especially in a downtown, are unlikely to be the last buildings or be the ultimate building. So we were able to get downtown Seaside going with some little shacks and tables with canvas over them, and then we gradually did slightly bigger buildings. But our most successful investments in terms of ROI, return on investment, have always been these little shack-like buildings, moving a sharecropper's cabin in, or building an 8-foot square plywood shack and then giving it 10 sisters, something of that sort. The Airstream trailers are a great success. So The answer to that is I hope in my lifetime we will see most of these things replaced by somewhat bigger buildings. But we're kidding ourselves if we think that we ever will see any of the towns that we have started completed, because no town is ever complete.
Good, thank you. Anybody else? So,
I'm sorry.
anybody?
It's about speed and risk. I mean, you know, in my opinion, the question was about what's the model going forward. We talked about two distinct speed versus risk approaches. I would tell you that if you're a believer and you need to have both speed and price, you have to have quality too. You have to have a great place. You know, you can have speed and low prices. Usually you have to pick. So I would argue that the safer route is to do what Robert did. I think capital is going to become a little more conservative going forward, and I think smaller bites, less infrastructure built at a time, minimizing the maximum capital at risk at any point in time. That's probably going to be less and have a continuous stream. One thing we did in ours, I might add, is we didn't have huge phases of infrastructure. We structured our deals so that we could stop street by street, and we were turning over streets, not phases, not neighborhoods. We were turning over streets, and we just never stopped. And we always could have stopped, but we were able to stay ahead of it, and we structured all of our deals with consultants and constructors to just keep moving through this process. And so we were designing parts of Phase 10 when we were still building Phase 1, you know, but we just kept moving through, and it got a little tough at times because our contractors got complacent. They were going to get to keep the work, because starting and stopping without those is difficult. But we let a contractor go and brought another one in, and that sobered up the pricing again, and we brought the original contractor back. But that's the risk of doing what I described, is the contractors think they've got a lifetime.
Well, I would agree with David that quality is extremely important, and that you can have the combination of speed and price, but only if you pay a lot of attention to it. My favorite example of a great real estate development is Belgravia in London, which was done very quickly over a period of less than a decade, most of it, by Thomas Cubitt, a speculator, but it was on land leased to him by the Grosvenor estate, which now recently rolled over the 198th year lease to the second 99-year lease. It's one of the biggest real estate investment companies in the world as a result of this very savvy investment the Duke of Grosvenor made in the early 1800s. But this stuff was production building. Thomas Cubitt was the KB Homes of his generation, and he did it very carefully because the Duke of Grosvenor insisted on it, but it also was the market that he was going after. My sense is that the kind of real estate investment strategy that he pursued and that we've pursued will come back around. Real estate over the past generation or so has evolved from a slow, patient, boring investment that, in Will Rogers' terms, is a good investment because they don't make any more of it, to a high-stakes crapshoot that investors insisted on double-digit returns for because it had become such a quick thing, and because, in fact, we started making more of it through building farther and farther out through our stupid investments in roads that allowed us to build farther and farther out and use more and more gas. The shopping center that preceded Mizner Park, in less than a generation, went belly up. Now we're going to have to be a lot more careful. We're going to have to invest, excuse me, I think for lower but longer term and safer returns. You know, looking back, I feel that we were never greatly at risk in Seaside, and that the strategy, and this is all in retrospect, I'm not sure I was that smart 30 years ago, but the strategy worked out very well. And that is, we took a piece of land worth $1 million when I took it over and made it worth many, many times more than that what I still have left. It's, you know, been a great home run in that respect. And I think if you look at the kind of town building that is possible with the techniques we're trying to recover in the new urbanism movement, that really is what makes places like Belgravia, Belvedere in California, where the Belvedere Land Company still owns the downtown shopping district and a lot of rental apartments. That's kind of stick to your ribs money, I think, is what we will see investors beginning to look more favorably at.
And we're at about 5:15, so I don't want to hold you here for too long, but happy to continue a little longer if it's all right with you guys. Any other questions, comments? Yes, ma'am.
Actually, it's interesting you mentioned that because it's interesting you mentioned that because right now in Boca Raton there are well over 1,000 units actually in entitlements moving through. But it's interesting because it's incredibly patient money. It's actually internally financed money rather than going out to banks and so forth. So these are. And in some ways, it kind of highlights what Robert said. This is the kind of 2012 developer resume. These are developers that instead of having having a resume like the two to my left here that are the top 0.1001% of all developers worldwide, these are people that actually have their background is actually in finance. They have actually no background in real estate. What I'm concerned about is what this means for our cities and for our towns. Is these are folks that don't understand the idea of investing in an external way into improvements that can not only better their own property, but the experience of the whole neighborhood and how that can start to lift up, and that they might be thinking in a more internal way. So, I think that one thing we need to do is make sure that those developers that are, have a financial background and don't have a real estate background, that we're inviting them to discussions like this one and teaching them how to do that. But it's true. They're in Mizner Park and in Boca Raton. George can talk about this more. But in some ways, it's interesting because Boca is. You should mention this is kind of afraid of its future, and in some ways, there's almost this untapped market for a considerable amount of people that are interested in being co-located with Mizner Park and in the city of Boca Raton. So I can probably pass it over to you.
What I'd add to that is that I think part of the challenge is the fact that even in projects like Mizner Park, and I see it now even in downtown Hollywood, where after the project is built, people come in, residents will come in and complain about the noise. For example, vertically integrated mixed use is a huge challenge, no matter how you slice it. And unless you have somebody sign a full disclosure at the time to take that unit, that they acknowledge that there is going to be excessive noise or whatever, and you're not, you can't apply, as many want to, a suburban expectation to an urban environment when you buy a unit. I'm thinking of those units that back up to the service area. I can't even imagine what those folks must be like at times. But in Mizner Park we hear it, and in downtown Hollywood we hear it, the phone call, gee, why is there music playing at 11 o'clock on a Saturday? Well, What did you think was going to happen? You know, and so I think a lot of, I mean, the real challenge is convincing the lenders and the finance industry that those projects are still viable if done properly. If the right disclosure is done up front and you get the right tenant, they are immensely successful.
George, we didn't allow any of those buildings to be built in condominium or ownership. They had to be rental because you can move a renter to a more quiet location. You can't move an owner.
Exactly.
The subsequent developer who came and bought it, well, there's the hidden value, condominiumizing.
Right. Right, and the other thing that's happening is that you're seeing a lot of projects that sort of call themselves mixed use, but you know the residential is over here on the parcel and the retail is over there, and it's, I mean, I'm not saying it has to be vertically integrated every time, but there has to be a relationship that has more synergy than just being happen to be located on the same parcel.
Yes, one more. Yeah. Is there much of an office space component?
Just about 1 million square feet.
Yeah.
And it's,
Built.
Huh? It works? Yeah, we were shocked. I put in, the first thing I did when I got there is we had $1.5 million entitled just for office, and I took 500,000, converted it to residential because we weren't in a submarket, and we had the right to make some conversions. There was no, we presumed 100,000 square feet a year of absorption of office, and we had live work, neighborhood office. Those are little houses, 3,000 to 10,000 square feet that look like offices, but you couldn't actually live in them. We had kind of boutique-y small office in the 10 to 20,000, and then we had a couple of sites for 160, 180,000 square foot conventional A- surface parked 3-story, 4-story, and we sold out of it in 18 months. It was just, and a lot of designers moved there. A lot of people built their offices there. They just like being part of it. So we sold it really quickly. Wish we had more. And in answer to the question about more residential, all these projects, when you've made this kind of investment, you always just wish you had more land to amortize the amenities, amortize the effort, amortize the brand that you've worked so hard to create. We could easily sell another 5,000 or 6,000 units without building anything else other than, you know, a few rec centers and all that. But I mean, we could keep going and going if we had the land. It's rental. It's owned by either by the company that's using the space or on a speculative basis and then renting. There's no condo office in Baldwin Park that I'm aware of. There's one executive office building, but I don't believe there's any condo office.
You sold the property to the developer.
We sold land. We were land sellers. That's it.
Right.
What's the outcome for the waterfront, large waterfront parcels that are Baldwin?
It's too long a story. The people who bought it from us went through foreclosure. You know, but the owner of it is Dan Gilbert, who owns the Cleveland Cavaliers. And so they bought their note at the last minute just a few months ago, and so now they're trying to figure out what they can do. So
you sold it. It's the developer.
I sold it in 2005.
Yes. On your way out, don't forget to sign your AIA credits, just a reminder. Yes, one more question.
So
George,
yeah,
or
yeah.
Either one of you
Uh,
address that?
I think that's the most challenging thing is how do you deal with that reality, and I think it really has to be you have to come up with whatever makes sense for you locally, and you know your particular city council or commission or whatever it may be better than anybody. You know, a lot of elected officials, depending on what their background is, may react differently to different approaches. I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all remedy. And I don't think there's a one-size-fits-all. You almost have to cater it specifically to the snapshot of your elected officials at any given point in a sequence of time.
It's, this is clearly the resilience of the new urbanism. It expands and contracts. And
Right.
You should blindly trust your planning director because they know everything and they're wonderful people.
There you go. That's it. That's the answer.
Okay, Dean? Is that right? Okay, there.
Good. Okay, thank you very much, everyone.